And we're live. Hey, John, how's it going?
Good. Steph, how you doing?
I'm good. Is your hat an Amazon hat?
Yes. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. I don't
Nice.
have I don't have the same collection of swag that I think you have. I'm always like
Oh, got
excited
so much swag.
by your swag. So I ran around and tried to pull my stuff together, my hat, and then my well architected mug.
Oh,
So yeah,
nice,
yeah.
nice. Yeah, I've got a shirt on that I got in Austin. So if anybody tuned in last week and you were like, where are they? And they're not here, my bad. I flew back from Austin, Texas from FinOpsX last Thursday, landed in the morning, had a terrible flight, did not sleep, fell asleep in my cab, just slept the whole cab ride home, but was so exhausted and sounded my voice was terrible, so I decided to spare you all the pain of having to listen to me talk like that.
And
To get to
Steph,
sleep.
was that the first in person FinOpsX?
Well, we did CloudyCon like several years ago. That was my first like international speaking opportunity that I had that JR gave me, and I was like a nobody. Not that I'm a somebody now, but I was like a real nobody then, and so it was very lucky they like had me on the keynote to like a fireside chat, and I got to do a session. I remember being so excited. I actually saw like on my throwback on Instagram me like videoing just before my talk in my room and stuff like that. So it feels like a lifetime ago. But yeah, this was great to have. So the people who maybe don't know, so FinOpsX, so it was run by the FinOps Foundation, really good like meet in person session in Austin, Texas. And it was very hot and it was very fun, and got to see those people that I know, meet those people that I didn't know, maybe some of people who are now started watching the show, which is cool. And all the videos are going to be put on their YouTube channel. So when that's done, I will, of course, share a link. And so anybody can watch my session or Ali Whitman's session. And we shout out to people like Aaron Adele was there. We got to meet, you could see the keynote. So loads of fun things. Ashley, who was on the week before last, ran the event. So she might pop up a bit. So yeah, it was good.
That's good to hear because we were talking to a couple of customers who said the one thing that was tricky was that they didn't get to see kind of everything that they had originally wanted to check out. So it's
Yeah.
cool they'll be able to review some of that content. And then for the folks that didn't get to go down there, yeah, we get to check it out too.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see everything. I saw like 3 talks, but people that I knew. So it was like I was supporting them and learning about what they had to say. But there were so many really good talks that I wish I had the chance to go and see. So I am doing it. Is question, is this live? Yes, it is. Hi. Welcome to the show. If it's live, yeah. We're live and on the coming to you from I'm in London and John's near Boston. That's
Yep,
right.
yeah, we're in Boston, so
I had a moment there where I just forgot. But yeah, let's get into it. I realized we've been chatting about FinOpsX. But so welcome everyone to the Keys to AWS Optimization, the show where we share stories, concepts, and solutions to help you unlock your spend at AWS. My name is Stephanie Gooch, and I am a commercial architect at AWS. And I have John with me today, but this isn't going to be the last you see John, because John is going to start to be one of my regular co-hosts, which is very exciting. So John, in future, feel free to jump in and like do your intro, but give everyone the intro of who you are.
sure. Yes, I work alongside Steph on the optics team here at AWS, covering our strategic accounts, and been doing it for about 2 years now. I had an opportunity to work with some of AWS's largest customers on helping them realize their cost optimization goals. So, been very cool, and we're looking forward to not only in this episode, kind of sharing some of those stories, but doing it, throughout the rest of the season. So, I'm really
Yeah.
excited.
Exciting future ahead. And so today we're going to be talking about Graviton multi-architecture. So we've had a couple of Graviton episodes. This won't be the last you hear about Graviton, but John's going to explain a bit more about what that is. But as always, please feel free to put comments, questions in the chat. We've had someone shouting out Boston, someone from Australia who's watching. So welcome from Australia. That's so cool. And feel free to ask us any questions. And if we can't answer them then today, then feel free to ask us via email. And you can check out all of our other videos on our YouTube channel for all past recordings. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Okay, John, multi-architecture for Graviton. No, yeah, give us the spiel.
Cool. So yeah, we'll take a step back. I mean, with what is Graviton 2 and the Graviton chipsets. So Graviton instances came out in 2018. This is AWS's custom silicon. These are ARM-based instance types, so a little different than the x86. And when these first came out in 2018, I think a lot of folks did have some exposure to ARM-based processors. Maybe they used it in like a Raspberry Pi or some other kind of high efficiency compute type resource in their own world. But in the years since then, we've released 2 additional generations. So 2019 came out with the Graviton 2, and then earlier this year released the Graviton 3. And in that same time span, I think a lot of us have gotten more familiar with working with ARM-based processors, whether it's like in your MacBook, all the new M1s that are using those ARM-based processors. It's kind of like brought a lot more folks into this world of multi-architecture where, maybe I'm building or developing on one type of chipset and I'm running my production workload or running that application someplace else, or creating portable apps that want to be able to run on 2 different architectures for the CPUs. Or sometimes I want to be able to run, one application, in a heterogeneous design. So I'm actually running that app in both x86, maybe with Intel-based processors and then ARM-based processors, concurrently. And I might want to do that for a couple different reasons. Maybe I want to do that to evaluate the performance kind of in real time with my own production workload. And the best way to benchmark something is by using your own workload versus something that's like synthetic. So what we wanted to do today was talk about a couple different scenarios that folks are using multi-architecture, to either get started with the adoption of Graviton 2 or to do some of that benchmarking and kind of validate, what kind of savings they're going to get as they start to roll it out at larger scale.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn more, especially this idea of I think people, when they start, and we present about Graviton all the time when it comes to our customers, we kind of throw this idea like, oh yeah, you should just move to Graviton, but that's not always the case. People can just jump ship straight onto a different processor. So this concept where you can gradually do it and try it out kind of live is really cool.
Yeah, and I think that's like a big part of it too. Is folks look at the savings that they can get from Graviton 2, and some folks look at it from the lens of like migrating their existing workloads. Some folks look at it as like just for the new workloads, maybe I'll be adopting Graviton 2. And then, we've got some customers who are looking at it from the lens of, continuous optimization, where they're always validating these new instance types. And if they've moved to platforms like containers where they can take advantage of, multi-architecture builds and kind of let that like abstraction layer, do all the heavy lifting for them, they can have this as more like a background, like ongoing process to what they're doing.
Yeah. And like, we'll move into our kind of first area, which would be RDS. And just to jump on that, what you're saying, that one of my customers, I presented to them about Graviton, and we gave them like a hit list. So we had like a bunch of databases that already were the right engine type, and they could move straight on over into Graviton. But then when I actually spoke to them, because they'd started using loads, I was like, oh, they've moved loads. Turns out they just kind of set a rule with their developers, like, okay, use Graviton going forward. And that was kind of how they started it. But yeah, first of all, RDS, how was like an easy way to get started with that?
Yeah, and I think going on to what you were just talking about, like the new workloads, maybe a little bit easier if I'm going to be transitioning workloads. Obviously there's folks who want to be able to validate any kind of any kind of considerations ahead of making that transition, and sometimes that could be, hey, we're going to have to put some engineering hours into doing this. We want to understand what kind of cost savings or performance gain we're going to get from it. So one of those easier or lower friction, lower risk ways to start with RDS and test and assess that is if you're running in a multi-AZ architecture with read replicas, where we're reading from like a secondary copy of that RDS instance. I can set the read replica to use Graviton 2, and I can understand from that, hey, what am I expecting for performance? And then when I make that switch on the read replica, my writes are still going to the previous architecture, the way things have always been. And I can assess what kind of performance gain I'm going to get and what kind of cost savings I'm going to get from the read replica, and eventually roll that into production.
Yeah, that's very cool. I like the idea of, and is that hard to set up in terms of a physical infrastructure, like how you change it to be your replica?
Yeah, straightforward. And I think whether you're changing, a writer that you have within the RDS environment to Graviton 2, or you're just doing the read replica, basically the same process, right? So we use the RDS maintenance windows to basically toggle that instance type, and it just comes back up. And this is really just a strategy for folks who are running those critical workloads and want to have that extra level of comfort and kind of know exactly what to expect when they make the switch.
Yeah, very cool. Oh, we've had a question come in. Let me throw this up there. So what are some of the blockers you have seen customers have when it comes to moving to Graviton? Maybe just on RDS, or if there is any other services that you've seen?
Yeah, I think if we start with RDS, maybe the biggest one there is the version. So the version of the database
Mm-hmm.
is going to dictate the support. So there's a couple different pieces we look at. One is the database engine. So MySQL, Postgres, MariaDB will all be supported with Graviton 2. And then there's a specific database engine version that you're going to have to always be upgraded to. So sometimes if folks have older database engine versions, maybe haven't gone through and done the update, they're going to have to do that as kind of a first step before they go through and transition any of those clusters over.
Mm-hmm. This blog is what I use literally all the time. It's just like, I don't even have to save it. It's just like if I start typing in like RDS or Graviton, it'll just come up. But if this has what I use as my rule of thumb for the engines that work well with Graviton. So I recommend kind of checking that out. And fun kind of preview into what's going on into the labs. We're working with Rem, who was yet to come on the show in my team, who's going to come on hopefully. And we're looking at creating a query so that you can start to identify which engines you've already got. Sorry, which databases you've already got that are on the right engine version. So we'll keep you posted for that.
That's very cool.
I'm looking forward to having that because I just do it manually now. It takes me ages. But yeah, thank you for your questions. Any other questions, please put them in the chat. Okay, so anything else on RDS before you wanted to move on to another service?
Yeah, I think those are probably the big ones. I mean, that link is a great one because it walks through kind of every one of the considerations and gives some guidance on like, hey, how do you actually get started? Taking snapshots, kind of giving yourself the belt and suspenders if you want to roll back or make any kind of changes. So it's a good resource to have.
Nice. Okay, yeah. So EMR was the next one that we wanted to flag. I don't know much about EMR, so I'm going to be definitely asking questions and learning from John.
Yeah, so this is a managed service that really covers everything that's kind of within the Hadoop ecosystem. So think about it as a managed service for all your really large scale like analytics workloads. And this is a great one for Graviton too, because it kind of goes to the next level, just beyond what we're talking about within the RDS environments, where we could start to look at not only the hourly rate savings that we get with the Graviton 2 instances, but some of the performance benefits and how it impacts these like big workloads that are going to have lots of instances that are scaling up and scaling down based on the actual demand of the workload itself. So kind of adds in that like second dimension that you're going to see like a little bit more elasticity than you would see typically with like a database workload.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of that price performance element, isn't it? The balancing up of the increased performance, which is what we say a lot. If you look at the savings on Graviton, it's price and performance. Just as a caveat.
Yeah, and I think the cool part with this one is that it gets you a little bit more comfortable too with evaluating that like cost savings, right? So in an environment like this where we're going to have not only that like kind of unit cost reduction, we're also going to have like a net cost savings if jobs are completing quicker. It gets folks a little bit more comfortable with looking at that, and then it's still removing some of the additional pieces that we would have to factor in if we're working with like a custom workload or something that's just straight on EC2.
Right. So with RDS, you mentioned kind of changing over the replicas. Is there a fast way to kind of get started with EMR?
Yeah. So that's a good question. With EMR, we've got the ability to use these instance fleets, and what they came out with at the end of last year was this option for using custom AMIs for different architectures so that we could support these multi-architecture builds. So if you think about like an EMR environment, there's a couple different node types that are being used here. There's kind of these master nodes, there's these core nodes, and there's these like larger fleets of task nodes out there. And what ends up happening in this environment is that you can use these instance fleets to pick up to 30 different instance types and create an instance fleet for each one of the node types. So I can map inside those instance fleet configurations the custom AMIs for Graviton 2 and then one for the Intel based. And what ends up happening here is you can think about like all the work, the jobs that are happening in your EMR environment. Now you can have a mix of Intel based instances, you can have a mix of Graviton 2 instances, and then you can evaluate the performance there.
Right. Okay, that's cool. I didn't know. There's here, I'll share. I didn't know you could do that. So, but John sent me a link that I could share in the chat about getting started with those. That's very
We,
cool.
we had a customer example here too, where this was someone who did scale out that adoption of Graviton 2 in their
Mhm.
EMR environment, and what they ended up seeing was exactly those two different dimensions of cost savings. The first one was that 20% savings with just selecting the Graviton 2 instances versus their previous x86 instance type. And then the other piece that they saw was a 25% reduction in the runtime for the jobs that they were doing. So
Right.
you can think about it this way, like, the job's running, and then as soon as it completes, we're scaling down the instances. We don't need to use them anymore. We're not paying
Mhm.
for them. So you're,
Yeah.
shortening that amount of time that those instances are running.
Oh, I like it. Kind of like, I just thought of an example, and it was my air fryer. I've become one of those people that like is obsessed with that air fryer that my parents got me for my birthday. I feel so old. But yeah, my mum was always like, it's much more efficient than using the oven because you only need to pay for this like thing. I don't know if that's how the electricity works, but I'm going to use that as an example.
Yeah, well, yeah, that is a good example, right? You're heating a smaller space and you're doing it faster, so you're saving twice.
Yeah. But yeah, didn't was there also something around tagging for this as well that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, so tracking the savings, a couple different ways to do it. I think for EMR, the easiest way that we see folks, start to implement it is with a cost allocation tag. So if,
Hmm.
if I have like a cluster name, or I've got, a tag that I'm assigning to the workload, and I have it set as a cost allocation tag, now I can use, tools like Cost Explorer, and I can look at, not only the unit costs that I have for the workload, but like what's the net cost like over the course of a week or over the course of a month. What is this service costing me with the new instance type versus the other one? I can just easily add that up and show them exactly what that savings looks like.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. This whole story of just like you can start using Graviton, you can use the AMIs to do it, and then track it using cost allocation tags. Because I just had a call with the customer about them starting off using the Kudos dashboard, which is great, and they want to use tags to do it all. And I was like, just make sure that you have it enabled because that's a big thing.
Yeah, I think that's it's one of those ones where too, like, sometimes folks just don't realize how easy it is to enable the cost allocation tags. You can just log in, just click a button, and boom.
Yeah.
From then on out, you can track it really simply.
Yeah. So if anyone ever is like, it's just one of those big things where I'd never really thought about it because I didn't use tags in our curve. We just had account level information. So yeah, if you're like, oh yeah, I'm tagging everything, just please make sure that you've tagged it. And you can use cost categories to group a load of tags together if you are someone who's put M, the capital E, and a lowercase e, and all these different spellings and stuff like that. I've thrown a question to come in. So what's the best way for me to demonstrate both of those saving components to my organization? So I guess that kind of John's question around showing it using cost allocation tags, but any other recommendations for kind of showing Graviton savings?
Yeah, I mean, I think the cost allocation tags are definitely a great way to start doing that. Especially when we're running like a workload like EMR, where it's easy to kind of track all those components just natively
Mm-hmm.
within Cost Explorer. We have kind of like another use case too, where if we start looking at like the container-based workloads, things that maybe we're running with like EKS or in Kubernetes, we might want to get more granular with that. And
Right.
we might want to start looking at like pod level or other changes where we could be running like multi-architecture and having the same app running on Intel as well as Graviton 2. And there's a lot of cool tooling that's become open source, ready for folks to use, like kubectl, that you can use to track those changes when you start getting into custom workloads that are running on EKS.
Nice. I will share a link to KubeCost as it kind of pulls us into our next subject. I'd also shout out the cost intelligence dashboard. The KPI dashboard has got a really good section on Graviton and showing you potential savings and kind of how well you've done previously and what you've done before. So we'll always recommend the well-architected lab. It just took us a while today. It took us like 20 minutes to get to it. But yeah, containers. So let's chat about the kind of last one on our list, which is containers.
Yeah, so there's a really cool story here. I was going to paste this link over, and it's from a reInvent talk that one of our customers did. Let's see if I might need your help on this one, Steph, pasting
The
this link in.
Snapchat one.
Yeah. Yeah.
I gotcha.
Yeah, the Snapchat one. So Snapchat had a really cool story about how they started to bring Graviton 2 into into their service mesh. So they're basically running, an existing application, large workload, and they're running it on, Intel-based x86 instances, and wanted to be able to test Graviton 2 kind of in parallel with this and assess what the performance gain was going to be, as well as what the cost savings would be. Figure out if they're using the right instances for kind of each element of the service mesh. And this talk is a really cool one because it talks about how they did run those in parallel and some of the nice ways that they were able to take advantage of these multi-architecture builds. And just to maybe take a step back and kind of explain why this is a nice way to do it. Instead of having to maintain those separate AMIs for each one of the architectures, what we can do with the container world is we can create a multi-architecture build and have that in a container registry. And that's what Snap was doing, was keeping that in ECR, so that you're using what's called a manifest. And what the manifest will allow them to do is going to treat this like it's a container image, but what it's doing is actually saying, hey, within this image, I have 3 separate images, or I have 2 separate images for different architectures. And as soon as, this underlying node group is going to make a request to, kind of build based on the container image, I'm going to grab whatever's appropriate for the architecture. So this way I don't need to explicitly say, hey, this is a Graviton 2 instance, give me this ARM64 container image. I just say, hey, I'm spinning up more nodes, and whatever this node is, I want to grab the appropriate image for doing that. And makes that a really seamless process.
Yeah, that's cool. I need to check out the video. I was promised that I watch it, and I haven't, and I'm terrible. I'm a terrible host. This week's been away from me. But yeah, I like the simplicity with containers. I've never been a heavy container user. I feel like I missed that day at school when we started doing that in the world of work. I was off being a consultant. So it is definitely something I need to brush up a bit more on. But the idea of it being that easy, and that's the big thing with all of these services, is that we know that, and we didn't say this at the top, but we know that EC2 can be sometimes quite tricky to get started, even though that is the big use case that we see people get advantage of it because they have to convert to AMD, and it can be difficult.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of great resources out there. We have another immersion day lab that you can run to get started with those multi-architecture builds in the container world, and you'll find it's really easy, right? So depending on what you're kind of running inside that container, there's different languages that are going to have easier times going through and being able to do these multi-architecture builds. So folks who are using languages like Go or Rust, where these are multi-architecture aware, will have an easier time doing that build. And then folks that maybe are using non-compiled binaries, it'll be even easier for them because they don't need to compile any binaries, in that container image that are aligned to a specific architecture. So I really like that Snapchat reInvent talk, just because you can kind of go through that and hear some of those considerations, laid out, and how they sort of balance, all these different factors and find the workloads that are the easiest to get started with, assess what the cost savings are, and then kind of just put the gas pedal down and move forward on, rolling that out for that whole specific service from there on out.
Yeah. And going back to the languages that are easier, are there some where your applications, if they're written in a certain language, they're easier to go to Graviton, did you say?
Yeah. So Java, Go, Rust, those are definitely going to be ones. Right? Yeah, that'll be easy. And I think the area where you maybe want to start to look a little bit more closely is if you're using any kind of closed source software, anything that you're going to be dependent on the vendor to provide you with an ARM64 build. That's one of the places where you're going to rely on them to provide those bits in order to be able to run it on ARM. I think that's been one of the places where in the past 2 years, folks are seeing a lot of other vendors, providing more of these, ARM-based binaries, where maybe in the past they, felt like they had a third-party agent that, was holding them back from doing the adoption. Now that's available, and, they can go through and evaluate more workloads for Graviton too.
Yeah, so maybe that's a call to action as well, is that if you have got these, you call them closed kind of workloads, applications, that you go and ask your providers, if they've already got it prepared for Graviton, and if not, why? If you're a heavy AWS user and you're a big customer, like other companies do, we listen to our customers, and other providers listen to their customers. So if you give them that feedback that you really want to utilize Graviton or AMD, then more than likely, like you can work with them to do it. So and let us know if you do that. That'd be pretty cool. If that comes across, feel free to email us at costoptimization@amazon.com if that kind of situation happens. That'd be very jazzy. Yeah. So anything else on the other services you wanted to highlight? Otherwise, we're going to jump into like a bit of a FinOps kind of concept talk, aren't we?
Yeah, let's talk about it from the FinOps side of things.
Love talking about from the FinOps side of things. So you've already mentioned the like KubeCost stuff. I think I went to their talk at FinOps X. To be honest, it's a bit of a blur, but I think check that out once the links get shared. And so we've already mentioned as well using kind of our native tooling to start off with Graviton, tracking the cost and kind of usage. But what's the key thing to look at when someone starts taking on Graviton? How to track if they're actually using it well? What would you recommend them look at?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first part is like maybe looking across your workloads and getting started with some of those like estimates around the savings. And I don't know if you probably have had the same exact question, Steph, but a lot of times we'll kind of get a question where it's like, hey, what would it what would I save if I moved everything to Graviton too? Right. And
yeah.
It's a good question, right? Because we do want to look at kind of the full savings potential. But I think it can be a tricky one too for some of the stuff that we just talked about, right? So maybe there are those workloads that are closed source, or maybe there are some dependencies that are out there. And what can be a good way to get started is looking at kind of what that next milestone is. So FinOps world, we're talking about culture and like motivating change. I think what helps some folks out is being able to say, hey, if I have 1% of my current EC2 workloads running on Graviton 2, what would I save if I moved 5 to 10%? And if I did do 5 to 10%, can we look at it from two different angles? Where the first angle is that hourly savings, that's kind of almost a guaranteed savings. I'm going to save 20% per hour, for those instances that are running. And then I have this more variable savings of the performance gain that it's going to have some workload dependencies in it, right? So I think those are good ways to look at it. Is like, hey, what is this piece of the pie that gets me to my next milestone, and then what's this like savings range based on the hourly savings and then the price performance improvements that happen.
Yeah, because I think it's like trying to boil the ocean, isn't it? It's that or try not to boil the ocean. Where I'm just trying to pull up the KPI dashboard, because I think that's a good kind of point of view to bring up, where people, like you say, you hear the 20% savings or the 40% price performance and you think, okay, let's do everything, and it's not how businesses work. So starting by doing a little bit at a time, setting yourself a goal, kind of gradually doing it, is I think a very clever way, and also a way to kind of build trust with it. Like you said, like try, like this is like throughout this whole episode. Who've joined us a bit late, recommend go back and watching on YouTube. But this whole thing is about like doing it a bit at a time, and then also showing that, and then like the question we had is like tracking it and kind of showcasing those savings, and then also establish people that when they've kind of done this migration, that you're like, okay, just start with Graviton. It's cheaper, it's faster, just get straight on it.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the other part of it too, is sometimes if folks are just creating a workload on Graviton 2, it can be hard to measure what you're saving with that versus if you had done it a different way. And if you start with some of those workloads by doing exactly what you said, building the trust and kind of assessing the savings, you're going to be able to say, hey, now that we've moved, 30% of the workloads, or now that these new workloads have allowed us to adopt Graviton 2 for 30% of the compute resources, we're probably saving about this much, right? And it definitely helps that adoption.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Okay. We've gone out of time. Sometimes I swear I don't know how the time has gone. But thank you everyone for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. Next week we have Jeff Barr. Yes, Jeff Barr coming on the show, chief evangelist at Amazon, and we'll be chatting all about what he thinks is exciting in terms of optimization. But as always, email us if you have any questions, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.